Another one, we were working with, the impact of autonomous demand. Autonomous demand for us is mainly government consumption and exports on GDP, on productive capacity utilization. There was another paper, the first version of a similar paper was published in the Centros Rafa as a working paper, and we decided to extend that paper with technical change. So what we did is mainly to include labor productivity as one of our main variables. We want to explain in part, let's say we want to see the effect of an increase in autonomous demand on labor productivity. And for us, we understand that labor productivity is a kind of measure of technical change. There is a mistake there. So we are working with Davide Romagnolo and Lorenzo Di Domenico on this paper, and we will analyze mainly the case of the United States after Bretton Woods. Why after Bretton Woods and not taking all the time series? Because in the case of the United States, there are very long run series, like they start in 1946, let's say post Second World War. And we decided to start the time series, I think it's 1971, after Bretton Woods, because in our view, the United States in that period started a kind of full hegemony around the world, in the sense that the country was able to run large deficits without having balance of payment problems. So because it's the dollar hegemony, let's say. So how we are working, how we try to engage with the literature. In the paper that was published in the Centros Rafa, the idea was to have a kind of dialogue with the mainstream theory. So we work on high hysteresis. In this case, we did the opposite, let's say. We're trying to engage only with heterodox scholars, because we think that could be a kind of gap in the literature. That is that although there were a lot of papers, or not a lot, many papers that were working on the Zarafian supermultiplier, including productivity, we didn't have so much on empirical evidence. I mean, there are a lot of papers that try to explain labor productivity in a, let's say, post-Keynesian framework, but there was, in our view, few that try to include labor productivity in the Zarafian supermultiplier, that is a very specific model. And we didn't find any paper that tried to do both, in the sense that we have a theoretical model where we explain labor productivity, and we have also the empirical evidence. So, as you may know, the Zarafian supermultiplier is a Keynesian demand-led model, and we were working mainly with this model that was developed by Serrano in 1995. So I will anticipate some results. The results are that an increase. So our results indicate that an increase in autonomous demand initiates a virtuous cycle of rising labor productivity, among other variables. We are working with three different econometric methodologies: a standard structural bar technique. We include also Killian's bootstrap from 1998 for small samples. And finally, we are trying to work on also with ULIC 2005, that is a sign restriction identification procedure. So we think that there is a significant lack of research that incorporates technological change within the framework of this Russian supermultiplier, both at the theoretical and empirical levels. The scarcity is evident across a wide range of academic studies, highlighting a considerable gap in the existing literature. Despite the importance of understanding how technological advancement interact with economic models like the Russian supermultiplier, very few works have explored this intersection comprehensively. So, of course, maybe there are missing papers, and if you have any suggestion, we will be more than welcome, because this is a very draft paper. So this is so far what we found in the literature. The main paper that relates technical change on the supermultiplier is the one written by Cesarato Serrano and Stirati in 2003, that is called Technical Change, Effective Demand and Employment. After that, some colleagues from South America, they work on potential output on demand in the long run with the kind of Serafian framework. Also, Waita has a model that tried to apply some Serafian ideas to explain labor productivity in Argentina. And more recently, let's say after 2019, we have the Lady of Matsukato. Also, Thomas Pallet tried to include labor productivity in a supermultiplier model. We are all particularly, this is a theoretical paper. The Lady, Paliboni, and Passarella also try to include productivity in a supermultiplier model. Nam, Lavoie, although this is a neo-Galeskian model, they also include endogenous technical change. And then we have Brochure, conflicted claims and labor market concerns in a supermultiplier model. I think it's the paper of Brochure is the closest one to our ideas, at least in the theoretical part. And then we have an empirical paper of Girardi, Martinezzi, Meloni, and Stirati. Recently, Mamale, Spinola, and Berspaio, they try to include like R&D based R&D expenditures on this kind of models, but it's not very clear that this model is demand-led. And finally, Valeria Mazzucato and recently Fazzari and Gonzalez, they also try to estimate the high species effects, including labor productivity in a kind of Serafian supermultiplier. So we use this data. Maybe it's very small here, but we are measuring labor productivity as output per hour for all workers. We have autonomous demand, that is government consumption plus exports. We did not include government investment in this case. We want to analyze what happens with capacity utilization, with the level of consumer price index, with the industrial capacity, that is like productive capacity, the labor force participation rate, the unemployment rate, and also we included the interest rate as a control variable. The model is in levels in general for all variables except for the level of prices, that I think we included a kind of inflation, so the rate of growth of prices. So the empirical evidence, let's say that the stylized facts from the 70s in the US is that there is an increasing trend in labor productivity. So this is what we want to explain. There is also a kind of close relationship between the rate of growth of autonomous demand, so the rate of growth of exports, plus the rate of growth of government consumption and capacity utilization. As you may see here, you have the, let's say, public expenditures in red, the rate of growth of public expenditures and exports, and in green, capacity utilization. Of course, when the government tries to increase government spending or when exports rises, capacity utilization increase and vice versa. When we try to put the same graph of capacity utilization with rate of growth of labor productivity, It's not very clear that there is a close relationship. We have here the green is capacity utilization, and the black and the green lines are two different measures of labor productivity. But instead, when we change to the rate of load of capacity utilization, the relationship it's closer. So we try to include, let's say, labor productivity, but we work on levels in the model. And we think that we try to explain at least part of this increasing trend through time. So which is the main explanation, the main theoretical explanation is that in our view, when we have an increase in the level of autonomous demand, we have a higher level of capacity utilization, and then entrepreneurs try to catch up investing. So there is an expansion in the first in the level of production when they increase capacity utilization, and later on investment when they try to increase investment to catch the normal capacity utilization that is the planned level before the shock. So and during this process, there is a kind of change of technique, because when the entrepreneurs invest, they do that in new machinery that, of course, introduces the techniques that are in the frontier because it's new machinery. So during this process of induced investment, this will boost output per hour worked. According to Garignan and Cesarato, innovations typically reduce the total labor requirements needed per unit of aggregate output, enhancing productivity. And technical progress generally decreases the amount of labor required to produce the same level of output. So we work with data from the United States from 1970 to 2024. We define autonomous demand as real government consumption and real exports. And we work with the empirical model first in level. So we introduce in the paper 4 different models, one with exogenous technical change and some others with endogenous technical change. The only difference among these models is that the order of the values is different. I will show here only model 1.2 and model 2.2 that both are endogenous technical change. Again, this is the order of the variables in the standard structural bar. I will show model 1.2 and model 2.2. Model 1.2, we have autonomous demand, labor productivity, capacity utilization, inflation, and productive capacity. And this is the capital market, let's say. And model 2.2, we have the labor market. We have autonomous demand, labor productivity, unemployment rate, inflation, and the labor force participation rate. So if you want to see the technicalities are in the paper, you can ask me and I will send you a kind of draft that we have. We try to show very long run results. It's 72 quarters, and that's kind of 18 years in total. So in model 1.2, when we develop the econometric evidence, we find that the first graph in the left, that's one is the response to LAD to LAD, that's autonomous demand. So there we show that there is we shock autonomous demand, so there is a kind of upward shift in the level of autonomous demand. We are saying there that there is an increase in government consumption and exports for let's say increasing the level for 18 years, and this has an effect on labor productivity. That is the graph in the middle, the upside, that there is a positive effect in the long run. You see on the right the effect on capacity utilization, that is LCU. In that case, the effect on capacity utilization is transitory. We have here the rate of growth of prices on the left. Okay. And as you can see, the effect on inflation is very transitory and it's almost negligible. We have the response of productive capacity to autonomous demand. That it's also a positive effect that lasts almost 60 quarters. And finally, we have the interest rate that just a control variable in case someone else is thinking about a kind of Taylor rule or something like that. This model is about the model 2 is about the labor market model. So we have autonomous demand, productivity, unemployment rate. We have a transitory effect on the unemployment rate when government expenditures increases. We have a reduction in the unemployment rate, but this effect is only transitory. Again, we have a transitory effect on inflation, a very short one, and we have also an increase in the labor force participation rate. So part of the explanation is that when we have a decrease in the unemployment rate, some people that we are declaring not to be part of the labor force are entering the labor force. And finally, again, the control of the interest rate, that there is no effect. We have alternative tests with the Killian bootstrap, for robustness in case of small sample. And we have also sign restriction identification. This is very, let's say, debatable because we have a sign restriction. We identify the shock with a positive shock to autonomous demand, a positive shock to utilization, or a positive sign, and also a positive sign to inflation. This is right. Again, we are trying to, in this part, with the sign restriction identification, we are trying to talk, let's say, with more neo-Keynesian scholars. We are working on a theoretical model. Here I can show you the simulations. So we have an increase in well, here we don't have the autonomous demand, but we have a shock to autonomous demand, and these are the effect on GDP, productive capacity, the degree of capitalization, labor participation rate, inflation, and unemployment rate. We are also trying to include a different speed of adjustment between prices and quantities that is related to the classical Keynesian theory. So, as a conclusion, we try to include the autonomous demand shocks in a model with labor productivity, and we find that an increasing autonomous demand generates a transitory increase in capacity utilization and inflation, the unemployment rate, and the labor force participation rate, and a permanent increase in the capital stock and productivity. That's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll be very brief. So thank you, Santiago and co-authors, for this wonderful paper that I really much enjoyed reading and also following your presentation. So I have a few comments, and then I made a few comments on the PDF, and then I can send you later on. First one is on the interpretation of the first stylized effects on the productivity figure, in which you mentioned that there's a steady increase in productivity in the US from the 70s until 2020s, which I think it's not the case. In the 70s, 80s, there's a stagnation in productivity, whereas also in the post-pandemic period, there's a stagnation in productivity. And this can be related also to the fact that this follows the movements in autonomous demand, which you can perhaps add to the graph and see when autonomous demand grows the most, productivity grows more. Second point is justifying your identification strategy, because you do say that you adopt an identification strategy in which you try to assess endogenous and exogenous technical change. So maybe you can, for instance, following the econometric literature that argues that the Cholesky decomposition is used in particular in reference to theoretical work in economic literature. And maybe you want to refer to the more mainstream approach using one identification and the more Serafin approach to test the other, and you can maybe add that to the paper. Also because the paragraph in which you discuss the identification just say endogenous, exogenous, you don't say why you order the variables in that way. So you could add something more on that. One Canadian question: why do you use the difference in the level of prices, so inflation instead of the level of prices itself? Considering that the literature has argued that to consider the co-integration relationship that may exist among the variables, you should use the variables and levels. And lastly, it's more curiosity. Why do you not mention all the literature on the Calder-Verdon approach and autonomous demand, since you are the author of one paper yourself? So I was a bit surprised. And also, I'm very curious to see the session on the model itself. Maybe one last suggestion. I think you should add that section of the paper before all the other sections, because when I present our empirical works to people that are more new Keynesian, they are very advising us to model first, present a theoretical model, and then the empirical model and all the identification strategy.
Please consider this comment carried out by an editor of a journal. It's very important.
Of a very serious journal.
I have other questions, Tiago. As far as I see your presentation, I suspect that there is too much stuff in this paper. It's a very big paper. It's a thesis, it's not a paper. So I suggest simplify the analysis. And I also suggest that rather than putting level productivity identification at the beginning, to include the capital stock at the beginning, the most exogenous part. We had this also this discussion in very why, because you believe that the change in investment occur in time. So you can assume that in the short run of the quarter, the capital stock is something, and then can be justified through the super multiplier model, and also related to the suggestion given by Christina. My curiosity, the level of prices is a unit root, or you have to differentiate 2 times in order to have stationary battery. Usually, what I found in for the US economy is that the level of price is high to variables, and I don't know what does it means.
I will reply.
3 minutes.
So thank you very much for the comments. Grazie.
So thank you, Maria Cristina. Definitely, we will include this stagnation and productivity in the first part of the paper, in the stylizes factor of the paper. About the identification strategy, let me phrase it if I understood correctly. So you claim that maybe the emergence part of the technical change we can use like the Surafian framework, and for the exogenous technical change, the marginality. Yeah, you're right. We are still having a discussion because we discussed it with Lorenzo, and Lorenzo insists that we don't know. Maybe there is a kind of some technical change related to for example, Apple, right? When they get a lot of profits, maybe part of those profits they use it for research and development. So it's not necessarily supply side, because actually it could be included in a demand-led model, but maybe there could be a kind of exogenous technical change, even in a kind of Surafian framework. So we are still discussing it. I was not very, I didn't want to include exogenous technical change, but I did it because we were having this discussion with Lorenzo. Why the level of price? Why inflation instead of the level of prices? We didn't discuss this much. I mean, the idea was to show, even with the level of price or with inflation, that there will be anyway a transitory effect. I mean, there will be a permanent effect on the level of prices, but when we show inflation, it's very short run, and we wanted to emphasize that there is no inflationary pressures when you increase autonomous demand. So that was the idea, but we can consider, another version of the model with the level of prices too. We didn't include the Calder-Verdun literature basically because it's huge. It's not because of the lack of interest on that literature, but we wanted to focus. Actually, we want to reduce the literature review because we want to focus on this reference supermultiplier and just that. So the papers that are related to Calder-Verdun law, it's like we think that is another bunch of literature. It's related, of course, but it's not our main issue here. And because we really write down the model, we have like 30 pages, I think, written without the model, so it will be like a huge working paper, and including more literature will be too much. In the first version of the paper, if I don't remember, we have the model first and then the empirical evidence. But again, we had an internal discussion with the authors, and some of them insisted on having first the empirical evidence and then we will show our theoretical explanation, but thank you for the suggestion. For Guilherme, you mean these measures of the impact of trade, international trade and productivity is related to what Gabriel Brandinos? Okay, yes, I talked with Gabriel because the first thing he told me, I don't know if you don't know, there is a discussion of if value added could be how you measure labor productivity. If you measure value added divided the quantity of workers, that could be problematic because it depends on distribution. And I tried to explain to him how the productivity measure is done in the case of the United States, and he told me that it's a good labor productivity measure. So it doesn't have it doesn't apply his critique, let's say. Matteo, yes, I mean the capital as a first variable, yes, I will include a model with that. In the case of I didn't do the unit root to test, so I will try. I know that in the case of Argentina we have an integrator further too, but because we have 3 hyperinflations. In the case of the United States, I don't know. I think my intuition is that other interests or.
But this is the meaning, Robin. I don't know the meaning.
No, the problem is that when you have, for example, in our case, we have 3 hyperinflations. We have the level of the price index. It's like a very exponential.
You have a unit root.
Yes.
That means there is a stochastic trend in that, but the stochastic trend are eliminated through first difference.
Mm-hmm.
With the first difference, when you have a I2 variable, there is another stochastic trend. So it's something that there is an exponential stochastic, I don't know.
Yeah, and the problem there is that you want to arrive to a stationary series, you will not have inflation. You will have the acceleration of inflation. Also, so it's also let's say an economic problem. What you claim, the paper is a lot of stuff, but what you claim like it has a lot of stuff because we think we try to.
Cholesky decomposition, and then you use.
You mean the empirical part is like.
For instance.
Okay, I got it.
You have to make a choice. Which is the best model for you? Choose that and make robustness check on that if you want, or maybe some German guys will write you a reply.
So you suggest using only one methodology?
Yes,
okay.
Because the identification is the main part of the main body of the article. So you want to use sign restriction, very good decision. Try to look for the best sign restriction that is explained by your theory and focus on that.
Okay.
And then you can have just one Cholesky to put in appendix for something. Yes, say yes. I have done also this. It's not model dependent, my results. And I don't know if you mix a stock flow model or Lorenzo Di Domenico model with empirical analysis. I don't know if it's very, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to. I suspect that your idea is to make empirical model with the theoretical model.
Yes, that are close.
It's a bit difficult to present the results. I don't know, maybe it's the right choice. I'm not saying that, but consider that it's not so easy.
Okay.
When I usually see the SGA model, they use the SGA model, that is our stock flow model, and estimate parameter of the SGA through Bayesian structural bar, but the SGA model is not a structural bar.
Okay, I will have to think about that.
But I'm not sure about the suggestion. Maybe it's, your choice is the best one.
Thank you.
So thank you, Santiago. And the second presentation is by Gallo, the discussant in the Santiago Gun.
Okay, sì.
Diritto.
Okay, I'll go straight to the point. So I'm Ettore Gallo. What I'm going to present today is green investment and productivity. It's more a policy paper prepared for the OECD and the Italian Ministry of Finance. And our goal is essentially to provide to review definitions and measurements of green investment, and by providing a measurable definition of green investment, look at what are the productivity effects of these investment outlays. So the motivation is essentially given by the fact that there is a wide recognition that annual investment in clean technologies, however defined, must substantially increase. This is recognized by the Climate Policy Initiative, the International Renewable Energy Agency, as well as the latest IPCC report that estimates that investment requirements in these 10 years from 2020 to 2030 must increase from 3 to 6 compared to current levels. So our research goals are essentially two. The first one is to offer an overview of green investment definitions and measurement, and by doing so we provide a measurable definition and build a data set of 18 OECD countries over the period 2004-2020. And then second is, once we have this measurable definition and this data set, we test the effect of scaling up green investment and the effect of environmental regulation on productivity. So there are two parts of the story here and two expected outcomes hypotheses. The first one is that productivity gains that scaling up green investment will result in productivity gains in line with a sort of green capital deepening hypothesis. And the second one is that stricter environmental regulation will also lead to positive productivity returns to innovation, which is what is referred to in the literature as the Porter hypothesis. I'm gonna be very quick on the background literature. The literature is fastly growing, but at the time we wrote the article, and still today, there are still a scant literature on the macroeconomic effects of green spending. There are still a few studies, mostly focused on multiplier effects, such as Battini and co-authors. While the literature on the second part of the story, the one on the Porter hypothesis, is much richer, but more at the macro side, at the micro side, showing that firms that green innovate tend to have stronger productivity growth. And this is enforced when by stricter environmental regulation. So there is some consensus about the fact that the Porter hypothesis holds at the micro level, but not at the macro level. So the first goal is to define and measure green investment. And the main challenge is that at the present time, there are several definitions of what should be green, but there is really no agreement around the appropriate metric of greenness. In a paper that is now more than 10 years old, Inverst and co-authors in our OECD paper examine all different concepts and definitions related to green investment, and they conclude that because of the difference in asset class, because of the difference existing in the literature, it's very unlikely that an agreement can be found on an all-encompassing an exact operational definition of what can be considered as green. But the main challenge remains the fact that there is no clear indication from official statistics, and no clear indication from the system of national accounts on the appropriate metrics of greenness. There is still a very broad definition from the UN Environmental Programme on green investment as potentially all investment really as the sum of expenditures in abutment technologies, such as investment in renewables and resource efficiency, in natural capital, and to a lesser extent in digital technologies that can reduce the carbon intensity of production processes. Based on this definition, the main paper that worked along these lines is by Hérault and co-authors in an IMF paper that was later published in Energy Policy, where the authors identify three main investment components, which are low emission energy supply, energy efficiency, and carbon sequestration. The first one is Hérault and al. In this table. It's not the only one. There is a recent effort from the European Investment Bank on what they call climate change mitigation investment, which is comparable to the definition of Hérault. And co-authors, the green spending that is used to estimate green multipliers in Battini et al. That also include overnight construction costs of clean non-renewable energy, that is nuclear energy, and the climate investment measure of the climate policy initiative, where they basically identify climate investment with annual investment in renewables. The big problem with all the measures is that most of them rely on proprietary data, in particular on the Bloomberg data, which are quite difficult to access. Actually we managed to access this data, and as I tried to show you, these are probably the best data to measure green investment outlays, and because they cover a wide range of energy transition expenditures, and mostly, they are financial data. This is an important caveat, so they are difficult to make it coherent with macroeconomic time series. The Bloomberg New Energy Finance data cover expenditures in renewable energy, energy storage, nuclear power, hydrogen, CCS, carbon capture and sequestration, electrified transport, heat, and sustainable materials. But the good quality data starting from 2004 are essentially only the first one, the one on renewable energy. And we actually see that renewable energy, if we look at this measure of green investment for G7 countries, especially in the first part of the series before the COVID pandemic, renewable energy accounted for a vast share of the total of green investment. And actually, because of better data availability, in the remainder of the paper, and so what I'm going to show you from now on only focuses on renewable green investment, as this, essentially because of better data availability. The distinction, the G7 countries in our sample compared to non-G7 countries tend to have a higher share of renewable green investment, which is quite intuitive. The data that we have, it is important to note, they are still a very small fraction of gross value added. The renewable green investment share tend to be from less than 1% of GDP. But I think this is also coherent with the fact that these are relatively new investment outlays. Based on our time series of renewable green investment, we estimate using the permanent inventory method, which is a standard way of measuring capital in national accounts. We use the method to estimate the time series of the capital stock, of the renewable capital stock in G7 and in G7. I'm showing you G7 countries, but it's for a sample of 18 OECD countries, including G7. And we see a clear and steady increase in the capital stock. And well, actually, if we are interested in looking at Italy, Italy is very lagging behind in the transition towards green investment. So the second part of the analysis is focused on estimating what are the productivity effects of these of green investment transition, and in particular we look at green capital. Our conceptual framework is essentially a production function estimation when we have traditional capital, let's say non-green capital and green capital, as our independent variables, and productivity growth as our dependent variable. So this is a pretty standard and probably not so pretty mainstream approach to look at the issue. But this is justified by the fact that we want to engage with the mainstream literature, in particular with Pisani-Ferry, who argued in a recent Peterson paper that the transition would have a negative effect on medium and long-term, negative medium to long-term impacts on productivity, and we must transition because of climate change mitigation, but we must be aware that this will have a negative impact on our economy, generally speaking. And so we want to show that this is not necessarily true, and we do this by essentially having the same, trying to put the argument on the same ground as it does. So we test this hypothesis of green capital deepening, but of course the process does not happen in a vacuum. It is affected by policies, in particular by environmental policies, and so we look at the effect of environmental policies by considering how the stringency of different environmental policies affect productivities. The data set covers 18 countries. We have annual data on green investment, green capital, capital formation, hours worked, labor productivity, which is measured as output per hour worked, and the stringency of environmental measures that is measured with the EPS, Environmental Policy Stringency Index, computed by the OECD. So this I can skip. So these are our data. Small y is labor productivity. K's are the capital intensity for total capital per hour worked, which is taken from UCLAMS and the Intanprod database, and our measure of renewable green capital, which is taken from the Bloomberg data on investment. We estimate then the capital stock using the permanent inventory method, and we divide by hours worked. And then the three different measures of the environmental policy stringency. So we have the total index, and then the sub-indices for market policies, non-market policies, and technology support policies. The environmental policy stringency, just a few words on this, is a country-specific and internationally comparable measure of the stringency of environmental policies. It accounts for three different sets of policies: market-based, such as carbon taxes; non-market-based, such as emission limits and performance standards; and technology support policies, which is a weird sub-index because it encompasses both R&D support and feed-in tariffs. So it kind of puts together policies which are quite different. In both of the total both the total index and all the sub-indices show a clear increase from 2004 to 2020, meaning that environmental policies everywhere has become more stringent. And we tend to see a quite strong correlation between our measure of renewable investment and environmental policy stringency over the course of time. Our model strategy is, we estimate a panel with GLS and GMM, so this is a very standard way of estimating a production function model, augmented with the investment and the environmental policy stringency. What we show is that in particular, if we focus on the second line, the green capital per hour worked, the increase in green capital per hour worked, as across all different specifications, very small, but always a positive and significant effect on productivity. While the environmental policy stringency index shows some more different results, because we cannot find any evidence of the Porter hypothesis at the aggregate level. The effect is positive but not statistically significant. But the only statistically significant effect is the one on of non-market policies on productivity, meaning that if we impose, for instance, emissions mandate, these are more effective in stimulating innovation than carbon taxes, for instance. So to sum up, our findings show that, albeit small, scaling up renewable green investment, renewable green capital actually has a positive and significant effect on productivity growth. There are differences across estimation between estimation results using different techniques. In particular, if we estimate with GMM, the results that we have point to a potential downward endogeneity bias. I forgot to say that in the GMM we use as instrument all the time series of intangible capital, which is also pretty standard in the existing literature. Regarding the effect of environmental regulation, we show that, at face value, strengthening environmental regulation does not hamper productivity growth, but the effect of policies are different. In particular, market policies will lead to productivity effects that are positive but not significant, while non-market policies such as emission limit are the most effective in fostering innovation in the sample. And last, also we don't find any support for technology. Well, technology support measures have also a positive but not significant impact on productivity. But again, this, in my opinion, points to the fact that the EPS sub-index for technology support it takes together two sets of policies which have arguably different effects, because you basically mix up public R&D expenditure with subsidies. And last, I forgot to mention that in the estimation results, but we also look at the effect of green skill intensity, and when we interact with our measure of renewable green capital, we find a positive and statistically significant effect on productivity. So I'm going fast to conclusion. Well, what we do is to provide an early support to the idea that scaling up green investment does not hamper productivity growth, and in particular some policies such as public investment will, having a policy of both public investment, green public investment will help in mobilizing private capital and creating more favorable conditions for private investment, as suggested by the lady and co-authors. That's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Santiago?
Really, in the paper.
Thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed reading the paper. I sent you a lot of comments through email. I try to read in detail because I'm pretty sure that I will not be the best discussant, because I don't know very much this literature on green investment and stuff, but I did my best. I think, given that I don't know very much this literature, I try to focus on how the paper is written, for kind of reader, and then I have some comments. So I think the first part of the literature review is not very well articulated, but the second part, it's with the table and that stuff, is really brilliant. So I really enjoy that part. It's very clear. Then I had some doubts also with the construction of the data sets, because it's not very clear. We talk about capital stock, investment, and then in the end, the reader is like completely lost, because we don't understand which are the variables that finally you are using for the model. And so I think that the paper is very promising, but you can work a little bit on the comments I sent to you, if you want. Now, comments more stringent, let's say. In the first part of the literature review, it could be great if you can show, because they say, okay, there is a lot of different measures of reinvestment, and it's not clear. There is no definition. There is no clear definition also. Maybe you can take just one country, for example, I know the US, and try to show if all the data of all the other papers are more or less consistent across each other. Because if the green investments, let's say, measure are completely different, it's like we have a problem, a serious problem, right? Because actually there is you are showing that there is no consistency across the literature. So that could be really helpful. I have another comment that this is because I don't know each other, maybe also the methodological part. I think you use the Arellano-Bon method, right? So in the empirical part, the construction of the dataset. So you have the capital stock, and then you have the renewable green investment, the renewable green capital stock, right? So my question was, if the renewable green capital stock is inside also of the capital stock, because if you have that problem, maybe you have the coefficients are low, maybe because it's also included in the other variable. But I'm not sure about this. And then just a curiosity about this literature, this Bloomberg database, right, in the NEF database that you show us, you have renewable energy storage, nuclear power, hydrogen. So is it this data is checked that it really has a kind of let's say green effect? I don't know how to measure also that, but is it like checked that there is a kind of green effect, or is it called a green investment just because the technologies are kind of green? But if someone did a kind of study to check if these measures are really green, let's say. But that was just a curiosity. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'll start from the Aurelano bond part of the question. So the renewable green capital stock is not part of the stock that we take from the UCLAMS data set. Because these are expenditure mostly untracked in the system of national accounts. So for this reason, we do not, of course, adjust the stock, the total stock of capital, but we do adjust the productivity measure. I forgot to mention this. What we have on the left hand side of the equation is the gross value added is adjusted to account for renewable green investment. So we basically sum total GVA taken from UCLAMS plus renewable green investment, and we divide by hours worked. So so I think that this avoids having distortion in the estimate, let's say. Now on the Bloomberg data set, so these are data these are financial data. So every time a certain firm buys a solar panel, this gets tracked, and it is tracked mostly for large firms, not so much for government. So a caveat of the Bloomberg data set is that public investment is largely untracked. But yeah, well, these are financial data, so it is difficult, often difficult to say, to attribute the investment to a certain country. So the tracking between financial data and the system of national accounts is not straightforward, and this accounts for all kind of data, and in particular for this one. But at the moment, I will say, and this I will conclude on that there is a huge gap between what should be done to measure the effects of the low carbon of green investment transition with what can be done with the data that we have that are still very scarce. Prego.
Right here.
Thank you. May I?
Yes, you should.
To share my screen with the people. C'è Marco. I think, no, loro stanno vedendo, è condiviso. Okay, let me know 15, let me know when I have 5. So good morning, everybody. I'm Guilherme from the University of Pisa. For those who don't know me, this is a joint work with David Cano, Till Heidenreich, and Simone D'Alessandro. It's part of our research team there in the University of Pisa. And we are actually bringing some new results because we have been working there with this heterodox integrated assessment model, the Eurogreen. And we have done the effort of updating this model in the last year, bringing some interesting new features and also improving, sophisticating a little bit some relations. So it was a big effort, and now we are in the process of finding some results and some new features that we can explore by using this model. So this is a bit of an initial work in the sense that the effort of make a paper out of this update is recent. So we are bringing some features here, but I would love to hear some comments to support our analysis and also to help us to focus a little bit more on what is more interesting, in particularly because the co-authors have many different ideas on what to do about it. So this is the outline of our presentation. So I'll briefly introduce the issue. So in this paper in particular, we are focusing more on market-based policies for decarbonization based on incentives and price mechanisms. So in particular, the carbon pricing policy, but we also model the emission trading systems. And we also would like to emphasize the relationship between this type of policies and inequality. So this has many different relationships. So one of them is that carbon inequalities are a thing. So of course the topper quintiles, the topper members of income distribution, they are responsible for a bigger amount of emissions. And they also are more responsible for the cumulative emissions in the long run. So this is also they are more responsible for climate change, so to say. This is also relevant to think about because there is the understanding that there is a minimum amount of energy consumption and perhaps somehow a minimum amount of a carbon budget that's really difficult to substitute because more related to what's socially considered a basic consumption. So this is also something to be considered. Another dimension of the relationship between inequalities and emissions and the transition also regards the empirical fact that the consumption of poorer households tends to be more carbon intensive. So from the one side, redistributing income can increase emissions per se. And from the other side, also introducing these mechanisms such as a carbon tax will have regressive effects on distribution because you're going to make poorer households to pay more taxes. So basically, our starting point would be to analyze which are the effects of these market-based decarbonization policies on emissions and on inequalities. In the case of Italy, our model is a country model applied to the Italian economy. So the literature on integrated assessment models and also the literature more critical in this side of in this literature is growing the last years, but still is not so common, it's not so frequent to find models that have very disaggregated households, very disaggregated consumption. So the household heterogeneity, it does not appear so frequent in this literature. And it's something that has appeared in the Eurogreen model in all these versions. So the model first was developed for France, then for Italy, and now we have this updated version. But this is a core feature of our analysis, which allows us to study not only the composition of consumption and income for different strata of distribution, but also to properly analyze the evolution of inequality after the introduction of certain policies. Okay, so maybe the core ideas here I have already mentioned. We basically would like to also know if we should tax essential consumption in the same way as non-essential consumption, and an open idea that we are discussing now to possibly address in this paper is how to design a carbon tax that's not so regressive, or how to deal with this emissions inequality trade-off within the design of a carbon tax. So maybe, since we have a detailed vector for consumption, maybe also to specify different carbon taxes for different consumption goods according to their consumption in the different quintiles of distribution. So our modeling tool here includes an integrated economic and environmental modules. We have households and consumption heterogeneity for Italy. So we have regionalized households distributed also according to the quintiles of income distribution. This leads to 100 different types of households. So we have 20 regions in Italy and 5 quintiles, of course. And we have a consumption-based CO2 accounting, which also was a lot of work, but we managed to make it. And those are features of this updated version in the Eurogreen, which also includes a much more detailed energy module, which is interlinked with the economic side of the story. So we have the hard linkages between energy part and the economic side of the model. So I'll try to be brief in the methodology because we don't have a lot of time, but basically to talk a little bit about Eurogreen. Eurogreen is a model, an integrated assessment model, which follows a demand-led determination of output and a demand-led determination of growth. It follows a stock flow consistent framework and is applied for the Italian case. This one that we are analyzing. It has an endogenous module of technical change, which governs the dynamics of productivity and technical coefficients in an input-output structure. So the model is built according to an input-output perspective, which allows us to connect production side, also labor, and the emissions, energy consumption, and CO2 emissions. In this updated version, we have a detailed input-output price model inspired in the works of Leontief and Zraffa. And one feature of the model that was always there, but is also improving, is the highly detailed labor market. So of course, employment is determined according to an effective demand system. We have labor productivity and we have labor demand coming from the demand for final goods according to the productivity and the IO coefficients. So we have endogenous participation rates, small varying according to the labor market conditions. High unemployment disencourages participation, lower unemployment encourages participation. And we have this detailed analysis of the labor market and allows us to have also wages varying according to gender, industry of activity, and skill levels. And these wages evolve in time according to productivity, employment, and inflation, with an incomplete pass-through of the past increase in prices. So just to mention another key feature, which is also present in this updated version of the model, we refined a lot the difference between basic and purchased prices in the model, which also allows us to properly deal with the carbon costs as they are part of this difference between basic and purchasing prices in the tax less subsidies component. So that an increase in a carbon tax increases final prices. So this might also, this affects real income and consumption. Few remark about consumption is that we have 16, I can do that, right? I minimized, but I think people are still seeing it. So we have 16 COICOP categories, which are connected to the NASH, the input-output approach, through a bridging matrix. We have small elasticities of the shares of consumption goods, which vary according to relative prices. Those were estimated and is part of the model. So in our approach, they tend to be smaller than what's usually seen in mainstream papers, but I think is more realistic, but it's something that we can also openly discuss. This is just a simple overview of the model. So basically also emphasizing what's very much repeated in this literature, that we have the hard linkages and the connections between all these different parts, different components of the model in simulations that run until 2050. Of course, this idea is that we are able to generate scenarios, to compare scenarios. Of course, we are not using a model to forecast the future, but we are using it to assess desirable futures and compare the outcomes of different policies. So, Cinque, okay, very quickly on the households. So I said we have 100 representative households. So we have Italian population distributed according to these regions and quintiles. And the interesting thing is that we are also able to build the consumption vector also following the same detailment. So the idea of having households was also to being able to match the distribution of income with the consumption, because consumption services usually use the household as the sample, so that we are able to diversify the consumption bundle according to the different regions of Italy and also to the different quintiles. So this is also interesting because, I don't know, maybe in the north of Italy it's colder and you need more fuel to heat your house than in the south of Italy. So things of this type do appear here. Okay, so this is just on the construction of households, matching the dataset on individuals for the income generation and households for distribution and consumption. So I can skip the data methodology. Okay, so I think we can move to results. So I mean, also propensities consumer computing based on national on the service, but they are rescaled to match national accounts, and we are able to see this heterogeneity in consumption across different household groups. So we have the different composition of consumption based on these goods. So it's a little bit aggregated, so we could have a more detailed analysis, but we have the different composition of consumption based emissions for these groups according to what they consume. And this is an average for Italy. Actually, we have like 100 bars if we consider also the regions. We can see an increase in emissions according to the increase in income, but it's not so big as one could expect. If in particular, if we had a more detailed distribution, including percentiles, because top percentile emit much more, consume much more, but we don't have this detailment in the data. Okay, another possibility is also to analyze the different goods emissions per quintile. But the more interesting thing is that we are able to compare the shares of each goods on the consumption of different household groups. So the idea here was to try to find a specific goods that's more consumed, that has a bigger share in the consumption of richer households with respect to poorer households, with respect to income. So only restaurants achieve this result. So if you tax restaurants, there is the chance that's a more progressive tax, but all the other taxes all the other indirect taxes will tend to be regressive in a way. So this is a challenge of the carbon tax. And then we were able also to run a few scenarios based on a carbon tax introduced in 2025 of 50 euros, which increases linearly until 200 euros in 2050. And we compare this with a business as usual scenario in which we don't have a carbon tax. So we have this emission trading system which sets also the maximum emissions in specific sectors. And again, in the policy scenario, we have a 15% annual reduction of total allowances, so reducing this cap to emissions that's part of ETS, but this is also against a 2.2% reduction in the baseline scenario. Then we also explore a carbon costs redistribution, carbon tax redistribution. So this is also present in the literature. So we just assess how redistributing the revenues of this carbon tax can reduce inequality and what's the net effect also on emissions, because this will increase the consumption of poorer households. So we also check that, but this has also been done in other works. Okay, and then very quickly on our results. So it's a bit difficult to see. So I think we have to cut some scenarios to have a better exposition of the figures. But we see that in all scenarios, due to also other renewable policies of Italy, we have a decrease in greenhouse emissions. It's not very big, and this figure is a bit distorted because it's not including the zero here. So it's much below what should be the target for 2050. And we have that the carbon tax scenarios, so maybe you can see the red scenario, for instance, do have a bigger decrease in emissions with respect to the baseline. Still, carbon tax should not be seen as the ultimate policy to address climate change in our view. So this is, of course, if you take carbon tax alone, this will be insufficient to lead to the ecological transition. And the key issue is that, okay, we have this indicator of Gini of emissions, so the inequality of emissions embedded in the consumption of each household group. And we see that this Gini of emission tends to remain more or less stable in the policy scenarios, except with the redistribution one, where basically poor households consume more and so they emit more. So it's a bit of a perverse reduction of inequality. By an increase in emissions, and you can see also that the redistribution scenario has bigger emissions than the carbon tax, so the light blue is bigger with respect to the red one. And then also a novelty, another indicator that we were able to compute inside the model, in particular with this purchasing price, basic prices distinction, is the post-tax, so post direct and indirect taxes, Gini of households. And in this one, on the right, we show that the carbon tax does increase this inequality, this post-tax inequality, and the redistribution of these revenues decrease a lot this post-tax inequality. So, I mean, what am I almost done? 4 minutes now? 1 minute, okay. No, but I'm almost done. So basically, this is one graph that I think is interesting to our discussion and also to maybe check how different types of carbon tax can lead to different results in this indicator in particular, and then to allow us to study better this emissions inequality trade-off. So this is, as I said, this is a work that we are starting, so I would be very happy to hear comments and suggestions, especially how to move forward or what's more interesting to explore. But of course, we try to access the market-based policies, and they are partially effective at reducing emissions. They cannot be the only tool of the ecological transition, and they have a cost in terms of inequalities. And we wanted to know more about which different designs of this policy can allow for a better impact in terms of emissions with a smaller costs in terms of inequality. So a few issues that we are willing to explore in the future is also an increased CO2 tax. We start with a 50 euro only. Many people now, especially with the new estimates of climate damage, are saying that carbon tax should be much higher. I see in Pisa, Francesco Lamperti saying like 800 euros or things like that. We go until 200 in the long run. So we will definitely change our scenarios in this line. And also, as I mentioned, design a CO2 tax oriented to inequalities. Thank you very much, and I'm eager to hear some comments.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. So my comments will be, I mean, I'm eager to read the paper, and my comments will be mostly all based on the presentation slides. So I'm gonna start with a provocative question. I mean, I don't agree, but just for the sake of provocation, I think it, well. So the thing is that I had I was looking, analyzed a bit the Eurogreen model in the previous version, and I think the financial market was more developed than in this paper. So since but essentially the focus of the paper is not much on financial markets. So the question would be, why should we use at all an SFC model? I think there is a broad consensus about the fact that SFC model are better than comparable than CGE EAM model because of the way they deal with financial markets. But if we don't focus on financial markets, then why should we not use a CGE integrated assessment model?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
So if the focus is not on financial market, what is the plus of having an SFC model over a CGE integrated assessment model? The second one is on the dynamics of the model. So the basic idea of market-based policies such as carbon taxes is that they will provide a market-based solution to the problem of climate change by changing the system of relative prices. But the dynamics of this change in the system of relative prices is one-off. You have a one-time change in relative prices, but the input-output structure of the model does not allow, in my opinion, probably I'm wrong, to account for a continuous change in the system. You don't have inflation essentially as this is a static model. Essentially, how would you cope with the fact that you cannot have different measures of, climateflation, fossilflation, or greenflation in the model? And this leads me to a third question, that is, why should we focus on market-based policies at all? Why don't we, if we focus only on non-market-based policies such as emission mandate, it is way easier to see this as a one-off policies. You impose an emission mandate on a firm, and then it's probably easier to do scenario analysis with this set of policies. And the fourth one, I don't know if the model features climate damage. So if over the course of the simulation there are some tipping points that are hit and have a negative effect on the model dynamics. That's it.
2 minutes. Okay, no more. But we are out of time.
Okay, thank you, Astril, for the comments and for the questions. So as for the financial market, so maybe you read some other paper where this was more important, the focus of the paper. The model has the same structure, so the SFC component on the financial market side is still here, but I'm just not using the results. So I'm not plotting figures and anything. Still, the model is a stock flow consistency in the sense that it's able to capture the dynamics of flows without having any black holes, and we have accumulated stock. So we also have feedback effect of wealth accumulation, debt accumulation, public debt targets on the dynamics of the model. So this is the point also of having an SFC analysis, where you have individuals accumulating savings and changing also the composition of wealth of the model. As for the dynamics of the model, so I usually see people discussing carbon tax also increasing times, but I don't know if this was basically the point. But we have input-output model, but we don't have a static input-output in Eurogreen. So this is something that I didn't explain well in the presentation, because in some other presentations we explain only that, and then I didn't want to do it this time. We have actually a dynamic input-output where the technical coefficients, they actually evolve in time according to a cost-induced technical change, in the sense that we have a probabilistic model. So also this is why we have the scenarios with confidence interval, where we have when intermediate costs evolve faster than wage costs, we have a bigger probability of having an intermediate cost saving innovation. When labor costs evolve more fastly, wage increases more fastly than the cost of intermediate inputs, we tend to have more labor saving technological change. So this is also interesting and related to this paper, because when we have the carbon tax, we tend to have an increase in the intermediate costs, which increases the probability of these innovations that substitute that reduce the amount of intermediate inputs, which also would lead to more efficiency in terms of use of energy and carbon emissions. So this is appears in the model, and this is calibrated to match long-run productivity dynamics of Italy. As for climate damage, we do have climate damage in the model. So it's a country model, so we don't have a feedback between emissions and climate damage because, I mean, it's only Italian emissions that we are capturing, and the rest of the world we assume to follow the business as usual path. But then we have the damage feeding back to Italian capital stock and labor productivity. And it's something that we are currently working on to improve and to be more nearer to this current discussion that climate damage is actually being discovered to be greater than usually assumed. Yeah, good idea. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this. So it's a basic items.
Yes. He looks angry. Oh yeah, that we cite a paper of Cascar. Okay, it's not here, but Ignacio Cascar is a Spanish scholar. He developed this bridge matrix, so I can show you later.
In a 15 minutes of presentation, once
Guilherme. Okay, so I will try to be as brief as possible and not to make Matteo any more angry. So today I'm going to present a joint work with Matteo himself. So it's a work on productivity puzzle and the European regions using the Calder-Verdon approach. So, as we might be already aware in this room, there has been a significant slowdown in economic growth and stagnation in labor productivity in in particular in advanced countries. And this has been despite all the development in technological progress in the past decades. This phenomenon, of course, has been widely studied, in particular in OECD countries, but limited research has explored the theoretical discrepancies in productivity. Traditional explanations to this have emphasized exogenous factors such as human capital, R&D investment, institutional inefficiency, excessive labor market regulations, as well as innovation gaps in ICT sectors. Other perspectives, however, have emphasized the role of demand factors, which aligns with the Keynesian principle. As we all know, the Calder-Verdun approach has taught us that demand growth actually can drive productivity growth via increasing returns to scale, as well as capital accumulation. So the research goals of this empirical paper is actually to investigate the. Let me remove this from. Actually investigate the productivity puzzle in Europe by applying this Calder-Verdun law. The key objectives is to extend the analysis to 277 European NUTS2 region across 27 countries between 1980 to 2017. Before you ask me why we stop at 2017, it is because we include all the regions in the UK which were present in the data in the Ardeco database until 2017, and they are no longer there because of Brexit, of course. We test the Calder-Verdun law in 6 different economic sectors. This is also a novelty because it's more common in the literature to find approaches that test the effect of on productivity on the manufacturing sector. We do extend that to other sectors of the economy. And last but not least, we try to pinpoint the nonlinearities in the Calder-Verdun coefficient, both including quartile distribution of average growth rate of productivity among the European regions, and as well as disparities between regions that are located in countries that have adopted the euro and have not adopted the euro. As a methodology, we use a panel structural vector autoregressive modeling with fixed effects for regions as well. And we also do a robustness, which I will not show you, but because the results are very similar to the original findings, including special panel VAR. Final structural VAR. In this robustness test, what we do is, besides including the legs of the variables, we also include the matrices of the inverse of the distance between the regions. The coefficients remain basically the same, very, very similar to our original findings. This is included in our robustness session. Okay, so I will not bother much with the theoretical overview. As we know, the Calder-Verdun law established a relationship between demand growth and labor productivity growth. Then this can be augmented by the effect on capital accumulation. And what we do in this exercise is estimating both the effect of demand or output growth on labor productivity, as well as the effect of capital accumulation on labor productivity. So we will show you both coefficients, the one on output and the one on capital accumulation. There has been, of course, a lot of empirical evidence on that, where they find mostly Verdun coefficients between 0.4 and 0.7. We remain more or less on this interval, with the exception that we do estimate this for other sectors of the economy, as I will show you later on, and we also show some nonlinearities in the data using regional data. The same applies, of course, for the effect of capital. And we also find results that are pretty much to the standard in the literature. The same for the augmented Calder-Verdun law, with the exception that, of course, there's some discrepancy, because obviously we include the other sectors. I'm going to show the sectors that are that in which we observed higher or lower effects, or the quartiles or regions in which we observed higher or lower effects. Okay, so on data and methods. Our data set, as I mentioned before, is a data set panel of 277. It's 2 regions across 27 EU countries from 1980 to 2007. It's retrieved from the European Commission Ardeco database. Our key variables are labor productivity, which is measured as gross value added per hour worked, output, Y, which is gross value added at constant prices in each of the sectors, as well as in all models, and investment labor ratio, which is measured as gross fixed capital formation per hour worked. And one of the first stylized facts that pops up when we observe this data set is a stark geographic disparities in productivity, as well as investment growth across European regions. Just to show you a little bit, this is the average annual growth rate of productivity in the period analyzed. So orange is lower or decreasing productivity growth rates. And the green ones are the regions that perform the best. As you can realize already, Italy is mostly on the negative scenario, together with most of the regions in the United Kingdom. Okay. Whereas the regions that performed the best are the regions in Eastern Europe. When we compare the previous graph with the graph on annual investment growth by next two regions, we can also find a pattern that is in regions in which we observed that there was an increasing pattern in investment growth in the periods. We also observed a higher productivity growth rate. So this is just a stylized fact that also motivates our analysis by quartiles of the distribution. Okay, so still on the methodology, as I mentioned to you before, we use a panel structural VAR model, and obviously to identify the shocks, we need to impose exclusion restrictions to our data. What we do is we use a standard Cholesky decomposition in which we assume that GDP or output affects labor productivity and investment labor ratio within the contemporaneous relationships, whereas the opposite does not hold true. We then estimate impulse response functions, which in this case are elasticities because we use level data to evaluate the dynamic effect of the shocks, estimated within a 95% confidence interval over 10 years. And after doing so, what we do is also calculate the cumulative effects by dividing the cumulative response by the shocks themselves after normalizing the shocks. So what you're going to see in the tables is the effect of 1% shock in the variable of interest. We apply this to all the possible sectors that are available in our data set. That is all sectors included in the economy, industry excluding construction, agriculture, construction, wholesale, retail, transport, accommodation, and so on, financial and business services, as well as non-market services, okay? So without consuming much time, so, okay, almost done. I'm showing you here very small figures, but as you can see here, I present just the first sectors. Then on the next slide, you can see the other ones. On the first and second column, you see the results of impulse response functions considering shocks and output, first column, and on investment labor ratio, second column. As you can see, a rise in output level has persistent and statistically significant effects on productivity in all models specifications. And that is also, and these results remain persistent even 10 years after the shock occurred, which is an interesting finding. And we find almost the same result for the investment labor ratio, with the exception of all sectors model here, and model for construction for obvious reason, because of as we expect in the construction sector, obviously this effect of investment labor ratio does not increase so much labor productivity, because as you will see also with the coefficients, they remain smaller in that sector, because obviously there's no that effect does not hold true so much in that sector. Okay, if we analyze the table, we get results that are pretty similar to the literature. So our coefficients remain between 0.64 on average and 1 in agriculture. The smallest, as I anticipated to you before, is the construction sector. Both values are statistically significant values. When it comes to the investment labor ratio, results are between 0.8 and 0.3 on average, which is also in line with the empirical literature. Okay. Then, of course, motivated by the disparities in our data, what we do is re-estimating the same model, dividing the data in quartiles. So just to have picture of what is included in our quartile. In the first quartile, which is the one that experienced the lowest productivity growth rates in the period analyzed, we have mostly regions in Southern Europe. In particular, all Italian regions are included in this quartile, with the exception of Lombardia and Emilia-Romagna, which are included in the second quartile of our distribution, okay? When we run these empirical exercises, what we have is that in the agricultural sector, which is figure C here, the coefficients are particularly stable, so it doesn't matter in which quartile you are. You will not see disparities increasing even more because of smaller or higher coefficients. However, in all the other models, what you have is that regions that are in the first quartile of the distribution have a smaller coefficient. Then actually this result keeps decreasing in the second quartile for then rising again in the third and fourth quartile of the distribution. So what we find in particular is that regions that are located in first and even in the second quartiles have a smaller coefficient, which then can lead us to think that disparities among European regions can still increase because of this coefficient. So if you are in a bad position, you're going to keep being in a bad position even because of your coefficients. Okay, so also motivated by these disparities in the data, we split our sample into two samples, one with regions that are located in countries that have adopted the euro and others in countries that have not adopted the euro, and this is the last result that I show you. And as you can clearly see, in regions in which the euro was adopted, the coefficients are smaller compared to regions in which the euro was not adopted. Obviously, here we are not arguing that the solution is getting out of the euro or putting the blame of the results on productivity on the euro itself, but we are just highlighting here that maybe policy constraints that were imposed on countries that have adopted the single currency might have led to worse results in productivity, okay? Obviously, there are some puzzling cases. This is the last thing that I'm going to mention to you, such as all the UK regions which have not adopted the euro that are still located in the worst quartile of the distribution. This is also to highlight that the problem is not the euro itself, it's probably the policies that were related to the adoption of the euro that were also implemented in the United Kingdom, okay, such as austerity measures. Okay, so just recapping the findings of our empirical research, what we do find through this work is that low productivity regions, in particular southern Italy, Greece, and parts of the UK, experienced or have lower coefficients, which might lead to increasing disparities among European regions. And then we have higher productivity growth regions that in which we estimate higher coefficients, and those are particularly Eastern European regions located in Poland and Romania. And this can be, one, partially to the effective use of European funds, or non-adoption of the euro with not much constraint on the policy side, as well as other dynamics such as the expansion to the east, and in particular the relation of these economies with the German economy in the period analyzed. So thank you all for your attention, and I look forward for your comments.
Thank you, Maria Cristina, for this very interesting presentation and contribution. So the paper is in this broader agenda. Also, Santiago was presenting before of demand-led growth and how the supply side can adjust to the increasing demand. So this is very interesting. And you also bring this perspective where you compare also different sectors of economic activity and also different European regions. So perhaps in the reading the paper, I had the impression that this regional comparison was not so much explored, but then here in the presentation, you brought some issues that I think you did not discuss there. So the paper is very interesting, well structured and well organized. A few comments, and one thing that I missed is a detailed description of variables and the data set that you're using, in particular the old story of how to measure productivity, maybe just to be more clear about it. And another question regarding your identification strategy is that, well, GDP is correlated with the investment labor ratio, right? Because if we understand that investment is induced, it might reflect this effect. Not so sure if Cholesky is sufficient in that case. And another issue is that I think you use the investment labor ratio to capture an effect of the capital stock. So also investment is more volatile than the capital stock, so it will have a bigger variance as a variable than capital stock would have, so might lead to biasing a bit the estimate. Another interesting issue that appears in your paper, and maybe you would like to comment more, is that the productivity effects, I was surprised to see, but they have high coefficients also in the service sectors, except for construction, but also in some others. And they are actually not very distant from the industrial sector one. So I was surprised. There is also this whole tradition on Baumol cost diseases that says that services do not increase in productivity. So I think this is also something interesting to explore and to value your findings. So what do you think about it?
Okay, thank you. I will try to be very brief, so we all go for the coffee. Okay, so thank you. Sim. Yes, Captain. So thank you for your both interesting questions. As a detailed description of data, what we use is gross value added divided by hours worked to take into account the business cycle variations in the data. It would be indeed more interesting to analyze capital stock, but as we are using regional data, that's like the best that we can have, which is gross fixed capital formation, also divided by hours worked, also to assess the same things. On the spillover, on the coefficients that are harder in the services sector, I think that's a very interesting suggestion, also because it goes hand in hand with the explanation, also the debate between the people like that talk about Dutch disease and also the super multiplier people. Because what's important also in analyzing all these other coefficients is also the spillovers in the other sectors of the economy. So you have a sense of also like how these dynamics play a role. So this is an interesting point. On the point made by Marvio, we were also very pleased by these results on agricultural sector. The best explanation that comes to my mind is still the spillover effect that the agricultural sector has also on the economy as a whole, but still I have data just on gross fixed capital formation and hours worked and GDP output. Yeah, we can talk about it, but if you have any idea, we appreciate because
It's a lot of machinery. Sure.
Yeah.
This is the
explanation that comes. It's the same. It's the opposite logic of construction.
Yeah, no, you're right. We struggle a lot with that result.
Yeah, it's the opposite with construction, which I think explains a little bit because construction we cannot you cannot do any technical change, labor safety technical change more than it's already how it is. Maybe in the future. So thank you.
Finish 2 minutes before the time. Sì, provavo a farlo un pochino per mi serviva per
Was inefficient then because we lost 2 minutes of discussion.
No, lavoro post